Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going straight into a story of technological failure. But not just any failure. We're talking about a spectacle. A failure so public, so dazzling in its own way, and so exquisitely painful that it could only really belong to a tech giant.
It really could. We are talking, of course, about Google Glass. And more specifically, we're diving deep into the unbelievably candid postmortem that was delivered by Google co-founder Sergey Brin himself.
That's right. And our mission today is really specific. We're going to analyze this spectacular crash, this whole saga, using Brin's own retrospective keynote as our main source. It was titled perfectly, "I Saw the Future. Unfortunately, the future saw me."
It's the perfect title. And this isn't just, a nostalgic look back at some clunky old hardware. It's a critical lesson in the massive, and as it turned out, fatal gap between having a technological vision, what we're going to call Steve Jobsism, and fundamentally misunderstanding human social reality. We need to figure out why a product with all of Google's money and power behind it didn't just, quietly fade away.
No, it generated this instantaneous, almost violent public hatred. Mockery, even.
It really did. And the whole thing, the entire story, it really hinges on this core paradox that Brin sets up right at the beginning of his talk.
Yeah, you have this man who had already changed the world, right? A co-founder of Google, a billionaire visionary. And he clearly believed he was shaping the next era of computing.
Absolutely. But then he opens his talk with this massive soul-bearing confession of ambition and failure.
He thought he was Steve Jobs.
He literally says that. And the public, on the other hand, immediately decided he was something else entirely. They saw him as sort of the living embodiment of everything wrong and entitled and, frankly, creepy about Silicon Valley.
And they coined that brutal, definitive slur for the product almost before the first unit even shipped. It was that fast.
It's the ultimate humility check, isn't it? For a founder who had only ever known success on just a massive global scale.
And as the source material shows us, this failure is the analytical backbone of the entire story. We're looking at a case where the reality distortion field, as they call it, was so strong inside Google that it blinded everyone.
Everyone, from engineering to marketing, they were all blind to the most basic human social norms. So this deep dive, it's really about social consent. It's about the rules of interaction, of privacy, of shared public space.
And the total lack of it in the Google Glass equation.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack that opening confession because it is so critical to understanding the entire arc of this fiasco. Brin starts his talk by detailing his moment of blinding, tragic hubris. He says, at one point, briefly, tragically, I believed I was the next Steve Jobs.
That is just an incredibly vulnerable statement, isn't it? Especially considering who's saying it. It sets the stage for a story that's not just about bad tech, but about self-deception.
Right, a misplaced belief in your own myth.
It's a stunning piece of self-reflection because he's acknowledging the failure wasn't just technical, it wasn't just a market-related failure, it was philosophical.
What do you mean by that, philosophical?
Well, the desire to be the next Steve Jobs implies two things. First, that you have this singular, uncompromising vision. And second, that the public will eventually thank you for forcing that vision on them, even if they hate it at first.
The Glass was built in that spirit, the heroic myth of the founder who knows best.
100%. And the source material really highlights that this belief wasn't just something he felt inside. It manifested externally. He calls it, in his own words, accessorized hubris. He was literally dressing the part.
He was checking the box.
Exactly. Yeah. He details all the elements of his self-perception that he thought made him a visionary. He had the black shirt. Check. Yeah. The unshakable visionary confidence in the product. Absolutely check. The ability to compel people through sheer force of will. The reality distortion field.
Big check on that one. He had all the trappings of the tech prophet.
He did. But then you get to the single most critical component. The one thing you need for any product that interacts with the public to succeed: social awareness.
And his entry on that checklist was chillingly brief and devastatingly honest. It just said, buffering.
That one word, buffering. It's the most honest and telling line in the whole retrospective. It signals a near-total failure of empathy. A failure to even consider how ordinary people interact outside of, a protected, sanitized tech campus.
It means the entire development process just skipped a step.
A huge step. The step of asking, how will the person sitting across the table from me feel about this device? The product was just built on this assumption that the wearer's convenience automatically superseded everyone else's comfort, their privacy, and their social experience.
And this This inherent lack of social awareness, it directly determined the catastrophic scale of the failure. Because most startup failures, as we know, they're quiet, they're almost gentle.
Right, they die in a garage. Maybe they get a sad little exit memo on Medium. Something like, what I learned from my startup that didn't work and took all my money.
Sergey Brin did not get that quiet dignity.
No. No, he did not. The failure was magnified exponentially by his fame. He failed on his face. He failed on his head. He failed literally on his eyeball while already being one of the most recognizable figures in technology.
The consequences were just instant, public, inescapable. The source even emphasizes that the failure wasn't just physical, it was broadcast. It failed in public, in high definition, from multiple angles.
Some of which, and this is the incredible part, were accidentally live-streamed by the device itself.
That is just, you can't make that up. So what does that magnification do? What's the effect?
It accelerates the social rejection massively. When a visionary fails that publicly, that visibly, the product becomes a lightning rod, becomes a magnet for all these broader societal anxieties about tech, about entitlement, about privacy.
So Brin's personal failure became a global referendum on Silicon Valley hubris.
Precisely. And the irony is just so profound. Brin wanted to use Glass to stream the future, but instead, Glass streamed the failure of that elite vision.
Which brings us back to the foundational idea behind the product. Because at the root of every major, ambitious tech push, there's usually a genuinely held belief, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's a bit naive.
There is. And Brin's foundational belief, as he articulated it, was astonishingly simple, but also deeply revealing. He asked, what if the problem with humanity is that we don't have enough screens?
Enough screens. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a truly tech-centric worldview, isn't it?
It's the ultimate tech-centric worldview. It presumes that every single moment of human existence, every interaction, every walk down the street is somehow deficient if it isn't layered with data and real-time computation.
So this is the critical moment, the big disconnect for the tech visionary. He looks at existing tech, the phone, the laptop.
And he diagnoses their flaws purely based on accessibility and speed. Phones were too low, right? They require you to break eye contact and look down. Laptops were too far away, creating distance. And then, most incredibly, he deemed reality itself to be underutilized.
Reality. Underutilized.
Yeah.
That is a phrase that should be etched onto a monument of tech hubris somewhere.
It really should, because it assumes that physical reality is just this blank canvas waiting for Google to come along and fill in the useful details.
And if you genuinely believe that,
Then the logical, undeniable conclusion is the one they reached. Glue the internet directly to your skull. The whole purpose of Glass wasn't to solve a normal consumer problem like, I need better battery life or I need a clearer screen.
no, the purpose was to solve the problem that Sergey Brin believed reality had.
Which was that it wasn't connected to Google Search 24/7. That was the problem.
I do have to push back a little on that. Surely they envisioned some practical applications. Navigation, hands-free work. Wasn't the vision for Glass genuinely compelling in, say, a controlled environment, like surgery or logistics?
Oh, absolutely. And to be fair, those applications for highly specialized head-down tasks were always strong. They exist today in the enterprise version of Glass, which is, moderately successful in those niches.
But that wasn't the focus.
Not at all. Brin wasn't focused on enterprise logistics. He was focused on transforming public consumer life. The expectation he had was that the public reaction would be this universal appreciation. Wow, Sergey, you've changed everything.
And the actual spontaneous, immediate reaction from people around the world was a little different.
Dramatically different. It was, why is that man filming me with his face? And that profound disconnect, that gap between the intended vibe and the actual intent, that was the first fatal wound.
So if the vision was to solve the problem of reality being underutilized, the immediate social reaction was to classify the user as the problem,
Right.
as the disruptive, underutilized element.
Precisely. The technology was designed to augment the world for the user, but in doing so, it immediately alienated the world from the user. It put the wearer in this separate, isolated, and highly suspicious reality, which is the exact opposite of what Glass was supposed to do.
Okay, let's talk about the infamous launch strategy, which, as Brin admits, wasn't a strategy at all. He said, "We didn't launch Google Glass. We released it into society like a social experiment without IRB approval."
I mean, that phrase, social experiment without IRB approval, that is such a powerful admission of corporate and, frankly, ethical negligence.
For anyone listening who might not know, what exactly is an IRB?
An IRB is an institutional review board. It's the body that oversees human research to make sure it's safe, it's ethical, and that the participants are giving informed consent.
But
It had two immediate effects, that price tag. First, it limited the financial risk for Google. They avoided a mass market flop right out of the gate. But second, and way more importantly for this story, it created a highly specific, self-selecting group of glass explorers.
it was a barrier of entry that only the already highly privileged could afford to cross.
It was.
But couldn't you argue that high price was smart marketing?
Mm.
It created an aura of exclusivity. The tech elite love exclusivity. Why didn't they embrace that identity? Why didn't the price signal, I am important and early, instead of, I am an entitled guinea pig?
That is a fantastic, critical question. And Google was absolutely trying to channel that exclusivity. They assumed the status symbol would override the social discomfort. But the explorers they filtered for, they were precisely the people who lacked the social antenna required to gently introduce a disruptive technology into society.
The source material is pretty specific about who these explorers were, isn't it?
Oh, it's brutally specific. And the list itself is a massive social critique. It was Silicon Valley executives. It was people who preface every single sentence with the word actually.
Oh, those people.
And my favorite, the unforgettable specific observation. One guy named Chad who never blinked.
The guy named Chad who never blinked. That's not a description of a visionary. That's a profile of a pathology.
It is. It highlights the deeply socially awkward, technically obsessed early adopter whose eagerness for the tech totally overwhelmed any sense of public decorum or grace.
And that demographic, that specific group, just reinforced the public's immediate negative narrative about the whole project.
It did. Google tried so hard to frame them as explorers, pioneers, bold figures venturing into the augmented future. But the general public, the millions of unpaid critics out there, they instantly saw through the internal branding and delivered their own, much more cutting nickname.
The immediate, brutal public rebranding.
Exactly. The product died the moment the public settled on its name for the users. That guy.
That guy.
That shift from the aspirational explorer to the dismissive that guy, that is the moment the product's social existence ended. That guy carries all the cultural baggage we associate with entitlement, with distraction, potential creepiness, and just a total lack of situational awareness.
And what's so fascinating is how the physical design of glass just magnified that perception.
Yeah.
It wasn't subtle. It was a visible external declaration that you were digitally separate from everyone else.
It looked futuristic, sure, but it didn't look inviting.
Yeah.
It was a social wall. Standard glasses, even dark sunglasses, they're understandable social tools. Glass was a visible asymmetric camera lens positioned directly over the wearer's eye. It broadcast. I am observing you, and I may be documenting you.
In a world already struggling with smartphone distraction, glass just took it to a whole new level. It eliminated that subtle friction of having to pull out your phone. It made the observation instantaneous and hidden.
Right behind a pair of expensive frames.
Okay, so let's dive into the core mechanics of the failure, what Brin himself called the comprehensive failure catalog. And the absolute #1 friction point, the social tripwire that instantly turned people against it, was one simple, unanswerable question.
Are you recording me?
That was it.
This was the point of absolute non-negotiable social distrust. It poisoned every single interaction, and the ambiguity of the device, that was the killer.
There was no clear signal.
No clear, unambiguous, universally accepted social signal. No blinking red light, no sound, no tactile cue for when it was actively recording or taking a photo or even just running a search. Nobody knew.
And the source notes that this ambiguity had an immediate and really corrosive effect on public discourse. Every conversation with a glassware instantly became hostile, or at least suspicious. It turned, I'm quoting here, every conversation felt like a hostage negotiation.
Just think about the implications of that statement for a second. A normal conversation requires trust, right? It requires reciprocity and a shared reality. Glass introduced an unpredictable, invisible third party, the camera, right into that space.
So you're having a casual chat, but in the back of your mind, you're constantly wondering if your words, your image, your environment are being recorded, archived, possibly uploaded.
And potentially misinterpreted later.
Yeah. Brin uses a specific, perfect anecdote about service workers that just crystallizes this power imbalance.
He does. He said, every barista assumed they were in a documentary called Latte Crimes, Season 3.
Which is just a brilliant line.
It's a funny line, but it reveals the power dynamic at play. Service workers are often in low-power, high-scrutiny positions. Having a stranger film them with an expensive hidden device while they're just trying to do their job, it elevates stress and it destroys any sense of safety or consent.
And the perceived documentary is never titled A Day in the Life of a Great Barista.
No, it's always exposing bad customer service. It's always a threat.
And the attempts by the glassware to reassure people only made the situation so much worse. Because when you asked them directly, they would automatically, defensively say, no, it's not recording.
Which Brin points out is the fundamental flaw of the whole interaction. That is exactly what someone recording you would say.
It's an impossible situation.
It's an impossible scenario for trust because the denial is perfectly aligned with the deceptive act. The very nature of the device made the wearer instantly untrustworthy, regardless of their actual intentions. The social contract was violated before they could even say hello.
And this inherent untrustworthiness, it leads us directly to maybe the most potent piece of social feedback Glass ever received, the invention of the slur. The public immediately, brutally, and universally co-created the term Glasshole.
The speed and scope of this social invention, it's fascinating from a linguistic and a cultural perspective. This wasn't organic slang that slowly developed over time. It was an instantaneous collective judgment.
Google couldn't even get ahead of it.
They couldn't even trademark the term because the internet invented it and spread it faster than their legal department could draft a memo, and the term quickly became much more than just an insult.
It became, as the source lists it, a noun, a diagnosis, and a lifestyle choice.
And that's why it was so lethal to the product. A glasshole wasn't just someone wearing the device. It was a person whose whole personality was defined by the device. It suggests a kind of pathological inability to interact with society correctly.
Someone who is technically optimized but socially broken.
Exactly. And Brin is crystal clear about the outcome of this linguistic attack. He says, no product survives once society gives it a slur.
I wonder if we spent enough time really thinking about the power of a collective negative noun like that. It immediately assigns cultural meaning. You don't have to explain what a glasshole is. The word does all the work for you.
It acts as an instant social filter. If you see someone and your brain processes the term glasshole, you are immediately primed to distrust them, to avoid them. It killed the product because it made the user persona radioactive.
The social cost of wearing the device became infinitely higher than any functional benefit it could possibly provide.
It created terminal embarrassment for the user.
So, moving beyond just general distrust, Glass created these specific, acute discomforts in established social settings, places where presence and intimacy are really valued. Chief among those were restaurants and, devastatingly for the users, dating.
Yeah, the conflict here is the collision of the digital maximalist vision with the analog need for human intimacy. Google's internal teams, they imagined this high-tech future of dining. They thought this was a chef's dream.
Chefs will love this recipe's augmented reality.
Right. They imagined a world where cooking instructions floated above the cutting board or wine lists appeared next to the bottle. That was the vision.
But the reality of the dining experience is about atmosphere. It's about conversation and consumption, not documentation.
Absolutely. And restaurants, as the source notes, instantly rejected the device. They demanded, absolutely not, take off the robot monocle. And the speed of these bans is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the universal social revulsion that Glass generated.
Just think about that timeline. Glass was banned faster than smoking, faster than loud phone calls, and hilariously, even faster than explanations of crypto.
Those are all common social annoyances, but Glass was rejected with greater speed and greater unity. That speed indicates this wasn't some nuanced debate over etiquette. This was a visceral cultural defense mechanism being triggered.
The signs that popped up in bars and restaurants were so decisive, so specific.
They often read, no glass, no filming, no discussing why you need glass. Society wasn't adapting to the technology. It was actively rejecting the device's fundamental intrusion. It was making it clear that certain spaces required dedicated, unfiltered social presence.
The presence of glass suggested the user was only half present, and the other half was potentially recording everything for later analysis.
And that brings us to the ultimate test of human connection, dating. The social risk involved here was so high that the source labels dating with Google Glass as a war crime.
It is the highest stakes intimacy test, right? A date is fundamentally a negotiation of trust and vulnerability.
It is. And if you cannot trust the person across the table from you to be fully present and, crucially, non-recording, the date is over before the breadbasket arrives.
The feedback that Brin captured from users who were trying to date while wearing glass is just brutal evidence of this total trust collapse.
Let's start with the feedback men reported. It was immediately disastrous, and it focused on flight and suspicion. Things like, She left before appetizers, or she asked if I worked for the CIA.
Or the absolute finality of, she said, "I feel unsafe," and vanished.
That's the key word right there, unsafe. The device transformed the wearer from a potential romantic partner into a potential surveillance agent. The anxiety it generated was so profound that it triggered literal fight or flight responses.
No amount of technological utility can overcome the feeling of being actively spied on by a potential date.
None. And the feedback from women was just as damning. It focused less on physical flight and more on the intense awkwardness and distraction of the device. Things like, he blinked too much, or he kept saying, just a second, to his own face.
But the most cutting feedback, the one that confirms the deepest, darkest suspicion about the wearer, was, "I think he Googled me while I was talking."
And this is the moment where Brin's visionary arrogance just collides with the harsh, unforgiving truth of human interaction. Because the convenience of Googling a person's background mid-conversation, maybe to verify a job title, check past relationships, vet an interest, it was technically possible with Glass.
And the source reveals that this suspicion was correct.
Correct. They did. They were doing it.
That is devastating. The ability to verify a date's claims in real time just destroys the entire premise of social interaction. It substitutes genuine organic curiosity and trust with this real-time calculated data verification.
It instantly turns a hopeful date into a job interview where the applicant knows the interviewer is reviewing their resume while they're talking.
It just confirms the central problem of Glass. It removed all the necessary social friction required for intimacy. When you pull out a phone to look something up, it's a visible signal of distraction. Glass eliminated that signal.
It enabled the violation while maintaining the facade of eye contact. The result wasn't just a bad date. It was an ethical violation of social space, and the public rightly and immediately recoiled from it.
Okay, let's pivot a little bit to the hardware itself, because the technical limitations often amplify the social weaknesses. Glass wasn't just socially intrusive, it was technically immature, which acted as this massive accelerant to the social failure.
Yes, and the source gives us a perfect, painful metaphor for the ambition versus the execution, the battery life. The hardware simply couldn't keep up with the vision.
It could last for, what, 30 minutes of continuous video recording?
Or, as Brin perfectly put it, 12 seconds of ambition.
12 seconds of ambition. That's a hilarious indictment. You have this revolutionary device glued to your face, ready to change the world, and it lasts just long enough to embarrass you, and then it dies.
And this contributed directly to the confidence problem for the explorers. I mean, imagine being that early adopter, trying to show off the future to a skeptical friend or a potential investor, only for your face computer to die mid-sentence.
You start by saying, "Check this out," and you end with, "Never mind, I'm just a sad person with broken electronics strapped to my head."
The lack of hardware confidence completely undermined the entire concept of the explorer.
So if the battery life was the lack of confidence, then the voice command issue was the social executioner.
Yeah.
You had to say, "Okay, Glass," out loud, in public, to activate any function.
And that technical requirement for activation just collided head-on with basic public decorum. Saying, "Okay, Glass," meant loudly announcing your intentions, your technology, and your disconnection to everyone within earshot. It required a performative moment of self-absorption.
It classified the wearer instantly. In the public eye, you weren't a sophisticated tech user. You were immediately categorized as one of three equally awkward things.
Yeah.
A cult member, a hostage, or someone arguing with a ghost.
And that classification is so key because it shifts the perception of the user from privileged to problematic. The constant need for public activation made the wearer an instant spectacle, and it just confirmed the public's worst suspicions.
That this device turns people into self-absorbed, mumbling pariahs.
Exactly. The technology lacked the ability to blend in. It forced the user to stand out in the most disruptive way possible.
And this issue of spectacle, it leads us perfectly to the global reactions. Brin and his team realized that different cultures registered their disapproval in these unique, socially calibrated ways, but the conclusion was always the same.
Universal rejection. The source material here is like a masterclass in comparative social psychology. It shows how cultural differences regarding privacy and public performance play out. And in essence, the global reaction proved that the rejection of Glass was not some localized American issue. It was a deeply human one.
Let's start with France. Their reaction was simple, final, and just elegantly dismissive.
The French response was simply, non.
That's it.
That's it. Just a definitive cultural boundary drawn instantly. In France, the public sphere is highly regulated by these unspoken codes of behavior and respect for physical presence. The device was seen as fundamentally impolite.
A technology that prioritized the wearer's documentation over the shared experience of the moment.
Precisely. It violated the established norms of flânery, the simple enjoyment of existing in a public space.
Okay, then you had Germany. And the German response, naturally, immediately launched into a complex discussion of surveillance laws and history and feelings.
Of course, this reflects Germany's profound sensitivity to data privacy and surveillance, which is rooted in 20th century history. For the German public, glass wasn't just a quirky gadget. It was a potential instrument of Überwachung surveillance
It triggered these deeply ingrained cultural anxieties.
about who is watching whom and who controls the data. The rejection wasn't just aesthetic, it was legal, moral, and historical. They were asking the philosophical questions. What does this device enable, and how does it restrict the freedom of others?
Now contrast that with Japan,
Yeah.
which offered what the source calls the most terrifying form of rejection possible.
Polite silence. Intense, terrifying judgment delivered without a single aggressive action.
How does that work?
In Japanese society, where harmony and subtle, non-confrontational communication are paramount, the lack of acceptance is the acceptance of failure. You are simply judged, quietly marginalized, and avoided. The glass wearer wasn't confronted, they were just treated as an invisible eccentricity, which is often far more painful than outright hostility.
And the rejection in other large, highly populated nations was much more pragmatic, right? It focused more on utility and appearance.
Exactly. In India, the reaction was straightforward. They bypassed the ethical debate and went straight to the practical. Why are you wearing broken spectacles and talking to yourself?
It wasn't primarily a privacy fear. It was a critique of fashion, utility, and sanity.
The device was perceived not as high-tech, but as bizarrely malfunctioning or simply unnecessary ornamentation.
And Italy, famed for its expressiveness, delivered a physical, kinetic disapproval.
Italy's disapproval was active, the source says. Gestures so aggressive the device nearly fell off. This is a rejection rooted in physical, passionate communication. Glass intruded on the highly expressive analog culture of Italian public life, where communication involves the whole body.
A silent, digital observer was an offense to the kinetic nature of their social space.
It was. And finally, you have the UK delivering the quiet but intensely skeptical British judgment, always in a whisper.
Is that legal?
Exactly. The British reaction focuses on order, rules, and propriety. The quiet skepticism implies not only a concern about surveillance, but a deeper, nagging concern that the wearer might be disrupting the prescribed order of public life.
Maybe by violating an obscure municipal bylaw or, God forbid, jumping a queue.
It's rejection framed through the lens of polite institutional anxiety.
So in every single cultural context, the device failed to achieve the basic level of social camouflage or acceptance required for a wearable consumer product. It was a neon sign.
A neon sign declaring, I am recording this moment and prioritizing my digital convenience over our shared public space. And that realization, that leads directly to the ultimate failure, the internal capitulation.
Google's corporate belief, the source tells us, was simple and incredibly arrogant. It was, people will adapt.
And society's counter-response was unified and devastating across all these cultures. We will not.
This wasn't just a few vocal critics in San Francisco. This was mass banning and rejection enforced by social pressure.
Cities banned it, bars banned it, even friends banned it from their homes. People were choosing to exclude the wearer, not just the device.
And the internal death knell that confirmed the product was truly doomed. Brin notes that even Google employees quietly stopped wearing it.
And that is the moment the product truly dies. If the very people who are paid to believe in and use the technology abandon it because the social burden is too high, there is zero hope for broader market adoption.
The creators of the device deemed it too socially burdensome to justify the technological benefit.
Glass died of terminal embarrassment, a failure imposed not by the market, but by collective global social will.
We have to now dedicate some significant time to the definitive anecdote, the story that crystallized the flaw of Google Glass for Sergey Brin himself, his ride on the New York City subway.
Ah, yes, the subway. It is not just transportation, it is the ultimate brutal social proving ground.
It offers, as the source so perfectly says, immediate, brutal, peer-reviewed feedback from 8 million unpaid critics.
And the subway is the antithesis of the insulated, optimistic environment of Silicon Valley. Down there, your net worth, your patents, your lofty vision, it means absolutely nothing. It is a closed system that processes social signals instantly and brutally.
For Brin, this was supposed to be a low-key field test, a symbolic gesture of connecting the tech leader to the people.
But for the people on the train, it was a test of social classification, and he failed miserably.
Let's set the scene with precision, because all the details here really matter. Brin boards the train at Union Square. He's wearing Google Glass, a slightly rumpled hoodie, and what's described as the quiet confidence of a man who had never been confused with the homeless before.
He was conducting a stealth experiment, but his ensemble and the device, they created this social paradox. The device made him stand out, but the outfit, the hoodie, the casual confidence put him into this really ambiguous category.
And this leads to his first critical mistake, the moment he actually used the device. He didn't speak to a companion, he just whispered into the air.
Okay, Glass, show notifications.
The reaction from the nearby commuters is just a masterwork of urban nonverbal communication. A commuter stiffens. Another one clutches her bag, instinctively recognizing a potential threat or instability.
And the signature move. A third commuter gives that long, slow, knowing New Yorker nod of deciding not to engage with whatever highly uncomfortable situation is unfolding.
To the seasoned subway rider, Brin was not a tech visionary. He was a man wearing broken glasses, muttering to himself, blinking aggressively, and staring into space at invisible data.
The classification was instantaneous and highly dismissive. This man was a subway philosopher.
Subway philosopher.
The label implies he's harmless, maybe intellectually engaged, but struggling financially or psychologically, and definitely someone who requires social distance. The glass didn't elevate him, it classified him as eccentric and needy.
And the second mistake, which just amplified the first, was that technical flaw we discussed earlier. The latency of Google Glass.
Yes. The pauses inherent in the early glass technology created a critical social problem underground. Brin would speak his command, wait for the information to load in his periphery, process the data, and then react to something only he could see.
To everyone else in that confined space, he appeared to be hearing voices, processing prophecies.
Or buffering divine instructions. And crucially, the source details that he smiled. A private smile directed at the data that only he saw.
Why is smiling at something unseen so socially transgressive, especially on the subway?
Because the subway is governed by mutual non-engagement. You actively avoid eye contact to preserve privacy and minimize any perceived threat. Smiling at something invisible suggests one of two things, and both are highly disturbing in that environment.
Okay, what are they?
Either it's highly private, hidden digital communication, a violation of the shared space, or, even worse, it suggests a psychological break where reality is separating for the wearer. It just screams distraction and unpredictability in an environment where hypervigilance is the norm and predictability is survival.
Let's add the final element to the visual mismatch. The hoodie and backpack combo, combined with the face computer.
That blend fell perfectly into the standard New York system of social categorization. It landed him firmly in the territory of we should give him space, or the more generous yet condescending, he's between things.
The billion-dollar technology had the net effect of lowering his perceived status to a position of needing aid.
Which leads us to the moment of pure, beautiful, unadulterated reality overriding augmented reality. Somewhere between 14th Street and 42nd Street, the moment of unsolicited, unexpected charity arrived.
This is where the story shifts entirely from analysis to human comedy.
It does. A woman described as having a kind, well-meaning Upper West Side energy approached him gently. She looked him in the eye, delivered a small, compassionate smile, and then placed 2 quarters on the floor near his feet.
And then she delivered the whispered, charitable verdict of the people, God bless.
The entire interaction was predicated on the belief that Brin was a person in need, an object of charity, not a technological genius. And the profound irony, which Brin admits, is that he didn't even notice it at first.
He was digitally distracted. He was checking email in the very glasses that had just earned him the change.
And the escalation that followed just confirms the social consensus that was reached by the entire car. New Yorkers, while often cynical, are responsive to cues. If one person validates the need, others follow.
A man dropped $1. More coins were added, maybe €1 from a confused tourist. And a child, providing the definitive summary of the situation, asked its parent, is he famous or sad?
And the consensus held. This man was struggling, he was harmless, and Possibly very, very smart in a way that had not worked out.
The final act of unsolicited aid. Someone concluded he needed sustenance and gave him a granola bar.
They diagnosed him as hungry based on the failed integration of technology with his face.
And this all builds up to the final devastating moment, the feedback loop of doom. Brin finally notices the gathering pile of currency near his designer sneakers. He looks down, looks up, looks confused, and quietly tries to correct the situation.
He's trying to preserve his dignity. He says, "Oh, no, I'm fine."
But the technology, the very thing designed to be an extension of his will, delivers the final, public, audible blow. Google Glass mishears his quiet reassurance and responds out loud for everyone to hear. "I'm sorry, I didn't understand that."
And that is the ultimate proof of failure. The product was a failure in communication on every conceivable level. It failed to communicate its creator's technological intent to the public, and then it failed to communicate his correction, his apology to the public, to his own device.
It just left him stranded, embarrassed, defined by the charity of strangers.
Brin exited the train at Times Square with $3.75 in loose change and one protein bar. Augmented reality had been fully overridden by actual reality.
He stood on the platform holding his backpack, just absorbing this humiliating yet clarifying lesson.
He removed the device quietly and placed it into his bag. Not out of technological frustration, but social resignation. And his conclusion, which is a perfect summation of the entire debacle, is that Google Glass was not urban ready.
And that no product that fails the subway deserves to succeed on the surface.
The subway test proved that technological advancement cannot circumvent the need for basic human acceptance and social function. It was the moment the Steve Jobsism delusion died.
What stands out to me most about this whole saga is that Brin didn't pivot to blaming the consumer or the press. He fully owned the core realization of the failure. What exactly was that realization about the difference between technological readiness and human readiness?
The core realization was that Glass wasn't, as many of its defenders claimed, simply ahead of its time. That's the common defense for technology that the public hasn't caught up to yet.
Right.
Instead, Brin concluded it was ahead of social consent. And this distinction is critical. It's profound for future tech development. Being ahead of your time suggests the technology is sound, but maybe the infrastructure or manufacturing isn't ready.
But being ahead of social consent means the technology fundamentally violates established human norms of privacy, trust, and shared presence.
Exactly. And he details exactly what they skipped in their rush to release the product under that Steve Jobsism assumption. They skipped norms, they skipped signals, they skipped humanity.
And they went straight to the typical tech bro mantra, trust us, it's fine.
And society was unified in its response. It was not fine. And this is the profound lesson for any technologist entering the consumer wearable space. Just because you can build something doesn't mean you should.
Especially if the product's primary function is to turn every single human interaction into a one-sided, anxiety-inducing Black Mirror pilot.
Glass was disruptive, sure, but it disrupted trust and safety and comfort, and those things are far more valuable than instant notifications.
Okay, so let's tie this decade-old failure to the present day, because we are now seeing the launch of new, extremely high-profile augmented reality devices. I'm thinking specifically of something like the Apple Vision Pro. What are the clear parallels, and more importantly, what are the lessons these companies seem to have actually learned from the Glass debacle?
That is the most relevant question for you, the listener, right now. The Glass failure served as a $1.5 billion cautionary tale for the entire industry. And the core difference we see today lies exactly in that area of social consent and signals.
So Apple Vision Pro, for instance. They learned that the ambiguity of recording is the killer.
They absolutely did. Their implementation has that external eyesight display, which visibly clouds over when the user is recording video or taking spatial photos.
So the company is forcing a return to that crucial social signal that Glass entirely lacked. They're saying, if you are recording, the world needs to know immediately, without ambiguity.
Exactly. They learned that the technological sophistication must be subordinate to the social requirement for transparency. Furthermore, devices like the Vision Pro, while they're expensive, are still largely confined to private or semi-private spaces. Homes, planes, workplaces.
Apple has, so far, not pushed it as an urban-ready device in the same way Brin pushed Glass onto the streets and subways.
They respected the idea that some environments, like the NYC subway, are simply antithetical to immersive, visibly distracting AR technology.
The source material also confirms the final, absolute burial of Glass. It is never coming back in a consumer form.
Brin is adamant about this. He says Glass is never coming back. Not rebranded, not rebooted, not Glass Pro Max Ultra. He concludes that some ideas don't need iteration or refinement. They need burial.
Which represents a rare moment of technological finality in an industry that's obsessed with sequels and reboots and continuous beta testing.
Google realized that the initial core product concept was just irretrievably toxic.
Before we wrap up, we need to zoom out a bit and reference the context provided in our source material about Google's enduring power. Because this failure, while massive, it didn't sink the company. It didn't even seriously wound it. A smaller company would have been annihilated.
Absolutely. The failure of Google Glass demonstrates that Google operates in what we might call an age of abundance, and it's supported by a massive, deep, and resilient infrastructure stack.
And this full stack advantage is why Google survived this mistake and can still remain a dominant global force, ready to launch the next, even more ambitious experiment. So let's break down that full stack, because that's the key to understanding their resilience. What does it mean for Google to have the chips, the servers, the models, the data, and the end users?
It means they own the entire vertical chain of computing power. Think of it this way. Google designs custom chips, like their TPUs for AI processing. That's the bottom hardware layer.
Okay.
They run massive server farms. That's the infrastructure, the server layer. They build the large language and AI models. That's the software and data layer. And they have billions of end users across search, Android, and other services. That's the distribution layer.
So they don't depend on anyone else for any piece of the puzzle.
Correct. Now, contrast that with major competitors in the tech landscape. NVIDIA has the chips, which is a powerful bottleneck, but they don't have the user data. Amazon has the servers with AWS, but not the same global consumer software presence. Microsoft has servers and enterprise users, but lacks Google's universal data feed.
And
Meta has some servers and some models, but they are dependent on hardware partners and often face these existential threats over their data harvesting methods. Google's foundational strength and full-stack ownership allows it to absorb a $1,500 socially disastrous face-mounted computer failure and just keep moving toward the promise of ambient computing without missing a beat.
the failure of Glass cost them money, but it cost them very little infrastructure, data, or market share in their core business. The lesson for them wasn't don't innovate, it was innovate, but with social restraint.
Because even our full stack can't overcome the Glasshole effect. And that constraint is the most valuable insight they gained. They learned that the technical capability, the ability to put a computer on your face, is only 10% of the equation.
The other 90% is managing the social, legal, and emotional response of the 8 billion people who have to share public space with your device. So what does this all mean for us now? For the users and citizens watching the next generation of augmented reality and ambient computing unfold, what is the lingering legacy of the Glasshole era?
It means that we, the public, have agency in setting the terms of acceptance. Glass failed because society enforced its will. The market didn't slowly kill it. Social shame executed it quickly. Brin's closing advice, the ultimate takeaway, is deeply human and empowering.
He tells the audience that if you see someone wearing smart glasses, even today, years later, you should actively engage with that situation. You should make eye contact.
That's a powerful directive, isn't it? You should look them in the eye and let them know.
Let them know?
Yes, let them know they are seen, let them know they're being perceived, not just observing. The core anxiety of Glass was its invisibility and ambiguity. By making eye contact, you neutralize the surveillance threat and you force the wearer back into the shared reality.
And most importantly, you reinforce the final lesson of Glass. They are not Steve Jobs. None of us are.
True visionary technology has to first acknowledge, respect, and prioritize genuine human interaction before it ever tries to augment it. If you skip the social, the technology just becomes pathological.
This whole deep dive really shows us what happens when brilliant people prioritize technical capability and instant information access over social acceptance. It creates the Glasshole, the person who is technically right but universally wrong in how they apply that technology.
And the challenge remains as we move into an era that's going to be dominated by ambient AI agents and subtle integrated computing, we have to actively ask ourselves, what small, subtle social signal will we, the public, demand next to maintain our sense of presence and privacy?
The lesson from the subway remains the guiding star, doesn't it? The most powerful technology is often the one that respects the unspoken rules of the analog world. If the next generation of AR glasses comes out and someone riding the subway is still tempted to hand the wearer 2 quarters and a granola bar,
that product deserves burial too. The ultimate provocative thought for you, the listener, is this. Brin and Google Glass suffered this profound public failure because they wanted to eliminate latency between the user and information. But was that latency that necessary moment you pull your phone out of your pocket, look down, and briefly signal your distraction to the world? Was that actually a crucial social filter?
That's a fascinating thought.
Perhaps those moments of friction and slight inconvenience are precisely what preserve our shared sense of human presence and communal trust. If we eliminate all friction in favor of seamless augmented reality, what is the invisible, priceless part of reality that we lose forever? Think about the social signals you give off right now when you check your tech and how you would feel if those signals just vanished entirely.
Food for thought, indeed. That's our deep dive into Sergey Brin, Google Glass, and the eternal, brutal quest for social consent.